and welcome back. This has been and continues to be a remarkable journey we are traveling together. While I believe that the word unprecedented has become the most used word in our vocabulary, this was another unprecedented week in the life of our country. The events of our nation and of the world serve to remind us once again, as if we needed a reminder, that life rarely presents us with unalloyed moments. Our greatest joys occur in real time in this world of ours, and thus are laced with a hovering, sobering reality. In the midst of our most profound grief, we know subliminally, perhaps, that our lives will go on, that we will smile again and even laugh again, and we will find ways to move into the future. If we did not know this empirically through our experience, Jewish ritual and tradition has a way of teaching this truth. One has only to think of the end of the wedding ceremony, considered the most joyous event in the Jewish life cycle, to be reminded that the breaking of the glass, which concludes the ceremony, is interpreted by many to signify the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in ancient times. It thus provides a reminder that even in our most joyous moments, we have to think of those who are less fortunate and who need our care, concern, compassion, and support. The ultimate message of that broken glass is that our world is still broken and needs all of us to exert our efforts in its repair. At times of loss and grief, when we are standing at the graveside of a loved one, we are instructed to recite the Kaddish, which has not a word of death or dying, but is a praise of God for giving us life. We are turned to life at the moments of our greatest grief. We find this teaching as part of this time in the Jewish calendar. As we noted in previous weeks, we are currently traveling through a period on the Jewish calendar known as the counting of the Omer. Some of you may know this unknowingly as the time in the calendar when there is a question about whether it is okay to have a wedding. The reason for that question is that traditionally, even though this time originated as the 7 weeks that connected the early barley harvest on Pesach to the more important early summer harvest, wheat harvest, 7 weeks later on Shavuot, and as the rabbis superimposed upon the natural agricultural cycle, the spiritual significance of counting the days until the Israelites' arrival at Mount Sinai, it came to be regarded as a time of semi-mourning. So it began as an agricultural counting from early spring harvest to early summer harvest. Superimposed upon that was the counting of the days until the Israelites reached Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. And superimposed upon that, it became a time of semi-mourning. No one is exactly sure why this happened, and there are several explanations. One that is commonly cited is that in the 2nd century CE, there was a plague that killed 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's disciples during this time, the counting of the Omer. In remembrance of Akiva's students, we do not engage in any kind of joyous gatherings or celebrations, such as weddings. On the 33rd of the 49 days of the counting of the Omer, our tradition claims that the plague miraculously ceased. That day, which is designated as Lag BaOmer, you may have heard of it. It's a minor holiday, but it stands for the 33rd. Lag, meaning the Hebrew letters, consists of the Hebrew letters Lamed and Mem, Lamed and Gimel. A Lamed in Hebrew stands for 30, Gimel is 3, Aleph Bet Gimel. So our tradition, so the combination of Lamed and Gimel, which is the numerical equivalent of 33 in the Hebrew alphabet system of letters representing numbers, Lag BaOmer became a joyous holiday of picnics, bonfires, singing, dancing, getting haircuts, and weddings. For the liberal branches of Judaism and many Orthodox, Lag BaOmer signifies the end of the mourning period altogether. For some Orthodox Jews, mourning resumes until Shavuot arrives. This year, Lag BaOmer falls this week on Thursday night, April 29th, and Friday, April 30th. For our purposes, I find it meaningful that we have begun the process of transition from COVID to hopefully post-COVID, post-pandemic, during this time of counting the Omer. This has been a time of accounting for us as we have been taking stock of these last 13, 14 months and have been engaged in the ongoing process of enumerating for ourselves all that these many months have meant in a variety of ways. As part of that process, we have also come face to face with our grief for all that has been lost in this last year. We have mentioned this in passing over the last many weeks, but I would use this Jewish time of semi-mourning to allow each of us to acknowledge, certainly to ourselves, and perhaps to others, that there has been loss in this last year, that there has been an emotional cost, even if we have not been physically ill. It is important to allow ourselves to grieve, to put aside for now our sense of guilt or even embarrassment that we should grieve when others have suffered so much more. That may be objectively true, but others are not you and have not lived your reality. They are not me and have not lived my reality. To deny our grief because others have it far worse keeps us stuck emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. Our tradition will not allow us to wallow in grief, but it insists that we express and process it. As we engage in these next moments of meditation and reflection, let us consciously enumerate for ourselves the losses of this year, however major or insignificant they may seem. If we experience them as loss, then that is what they are. Let us enumerate, acknowledge, and experience every facet of our sense of loss without judgment or criticism, without guilt, shame, or embarrassment. So let us begin. Let us take our places, our meditative positions in a chair, on the floor, standing, whatever is your accustomed place or the place you think you might be most comfortable. Our goal is to feel at ease and yet attentive, to be ready, to just let go and to breathe. So let us plant our feet firmly on the ground and sit with some attentiveness. I like to leave my hands open in my lap. Even the unclenching of our fingers is meaningful. And hopefully the letting go of tension throughout our bodies will follow. I like to close my eyes. Some may just wish to focus softly, gently on a point in front of us. So let us settle in. Oh, and take that first deep, healing, full breath. Let us feel it go down deep, 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 and imagine it is filling our chest, our tummies, our legs, our arms, all the way to the tips of our toes and the ends of our fingers. We can hold on to it for a moment, or a few seconds rather. and then let it go. And as we let it out, let us let go of the inhibition, the obstacles to feeling our losses, to feeling our regrets, to feeling the sadness we have experienced this year. We breathe in that fullness, that comfort of renewed life every time we take a breath. But even as we understand that is what it means, we acknowledge the loss of time, the loss of visits, perhaps with growing family, the loss of social interaction. I read an article this weekend that began by saying, every one of us is now socially awkward. We breathe out the small pleasures of hopping in the car and running someplace to pick something up, to grocery shop without fear, to enjoy a movie, a restaurant, a sale, a spontaneous gathering, or coffee with a friend. We may be mourning truncated celebrations, a bar bat mitzvah possibly in our family, a wedding, an anniversary, a birthday. Plans were sidelined. New plans were made. But before we congratulate ourselves for our resilience and flexibility, let us feel that sense of loss deep down as we take that breath. You may want to use a mantra of some kind. Something as simple as, I mourn the losses of this year. Or, I mourn the loss of. And you can fill in anything that comes to your mind. You could use a phrase of the Kaddish if that would have resonance for you. Yitkada v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Yitkada v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Given that there is a built-in stopping point with Lag BaOmer at the end of this week, you may want to use every day from now until then to spend a few moments in mourning, in acknowledgement of the kind we are doing here as your ritual of counting, of confronting, and then of moving on, as our tradition will insist we do. Speaking of which, simultaneously with the mourning and the counting, and with the anticipation of the end of the period of mourning, this week of counting the Omer has the mystical quality assigned to it of Hod, meaning splendor, as in the majesty of God. It also has the connotation of humility, as if the contemplation of the greatness of God brings us to a place of awe and wonder. The word Hod also suggests the attribute of Hoda'ah, or thanksgiving. This week, then, according to the mystical tradition, there's always more than one interpretation in Jewish life. Pick any one, you don't have to go with all of them. According to the mystical tradition, this week invites us to give thanks in the midst of our mourning, not instead of, but in juxtaposition with. Thus, our tradition leads us to balance, to mitigate any extreme with its opposite or with another quality of a different nature. This juxtaposition of mourning with thanksgiving also speaks directly to our understanding of the complexity in all of life. And so let us breathe. We could breathe in, I mourn the loss. And I would stay with that idea. And yet at some point you may want to include, and yet I am grateful. Grateful for this next breath. Grateful for the capacity to feel, to learn, to know, to understand some things and to stand in wonderment at others. As I think of loss and thanksgiving, I breathe in the knowledge that all of life is a balancing act. I am mindful, actually, at this moment, of my mother, who always tried to mitigate extremes. It's not that she was a downer, she wasn't. But she recognized that our highs do not endure, our lows do not endure. And most of life is lived between those extremes. I believe that that has been one of the lessons of this time, and it is beneficial to be comfortable in that place and not to need the highs as a kind of engine for our sense of well-being and for our activity in the world. and not to need the lows either as some kind of fulfillment. Of our fears, of our fears. I don't know if you are hearing, there is gardening going on outside the window. I hope you can ignore it if it is coming through. Finally, I would share with you a beautiful teaching that I heard this week from Rabbi Angela Buckdahl of Central Synagogue in New York City. She was speaking of the bonfires that light up the countryside all over the land of Israel on Lag BaOmer, and the image of light emerging out of darkness that the bonfires symbolize as the period of mourning is lifted. And in this time of pandemic, as a hopeful symbol of our emergency into the light of restored freedom of movement in a country, and hopefully a world that is fully vaccinated. As part of her reflections, she told the following story. There was a member of her congregation who was completely blind. She was a brilliant, capable, exceedingly successful person who did not regard her blindness as a disability. In fact, one day when she and Rabbi Buckdahl were in conversation, she mentioned that she went running with her seeing eye dog every morning along Park Avenue at 4 a.m. As Rabbi Buckdahl digested this, she said something to the effect that, I guess you don't mind that it is dark outside because you always see the dark. To which the woman responded, I don't mind that it is dark outside because I always see light. What a remarkable lesson is embodied in that woman's attitude. Beyond the material reality of darkness and light is the far more powerful nature of spiritual light and spiritual darkness. This time of counting the Omer takes us from that darkness into spiritual light. And I believe that our own grieving for this year will help us move from darkness to light and to a renewed sense of possibility and hopefulness. As we spend another couple of minutes breathing before we conclude, let us look for the sources of internal light within each of us. Let us close our eyes. Let us breathe in and look for the glimmers of light within, deep within that inhale, or just behind our eyelids as we breathe out. Let us find that spark of light and let us tend to it, nurture it, fan it into flame. Let us build that internal light out of so much darkness we did not seek or expect. And let us not forget that we sustained it all. That is a source of light. We adjusted and accommodated and learned and changed. And there is light in all of that. Our light, our shining light, our divine light. And as we recognize that light within, as we coax it out, especially if this is one of those days when it's not so easily accessible, let us coax it out. Let us welcome even a little bit of light into our souls. And as we do that, let us acknowledge with each breath the ultimate juxtaposition of our splendor and our humility. The balance, the juxtaposition, the existence of opposites or close to opposites or just disparate qualities. So much of Jewish life is based upon that juxtaposition, that balancing, or that tension between the two. Our splendor and our humility. Our grief and our joy. Our accomplishments. And our ever underlying sense of inadequacy. Our humanity. The divine spark within. That lives so closely with our limitations, our fallibility, our reality. I am grateful for this breath. I mourn the losses I have experienced. I am grateful for vaccination. I anticipate increasing normalcy in the days ahead. I know at some level that I am a splendid creature. I am entirely awed by the human spirit. By way of conclusion, I would share with you this powerful poem by Maya Angelou. It is entitled Continue. into a world which needed you. My wish for you is that you continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to allow humor to lighten the burden of your tender heart. Continue in a society dark with cruelty to let the people hear the grandeur of God in the peals of your laughter. Continue to let your eloquence elevate the people to heights they had only imagined. Continue to remind the people that each is as good as the other and that no one is beneath nor above you. Continue to remember your own young years and look with favor upon the lost and the least and the lonely. Continue to put the mantle of your protection around the bodies of the young and defenseless. Continue to take the hand of the despised and diseased and walk proudly with them in the high street. Some might see you and be encouraged to do likewise. Continue to plant a public kiss of concern on the cheek of the sick and the aged and infirm, and count that as a natural action to be expected. Continue to let gratitude be the pillow upon which you kneel to say your nightly prayer, and let faith be the bridge you build to overcome evil and welcome good. Continue to ignore no vision which comes to enlarge your range and increase your spirit. Continue to dare to love deeply and risk everything for the good thing. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance, which set aside riches for you before you had a name. Continue, and by doing so, you and your work will be able to continue eternally. God bless. May you have a fulfilling week, a meaningful week, a week filled with all of life's complexities. I will see you next time. God bless.